talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Wednesday afternoon edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. Apologize for a little bit of the tricky midweek scheduling. We decided to wait until after the college football playoff rankings were released to drop our midweek show. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, am I glad we did. We're going to open the show, the story that everybody in college football is talking about. The Indiana Hoosiers, who have all of a sudden become the bad boys of college football. Nobody wants to see them in the playoff. I'm here to ask you, is it the media? Is it college football fans? Why is everyone so mad about Indiana? I think I know the answer. And also, are they deserving if they do not take care of business against Ohio State? And if it gets ugly, what does that mean for the Hoosiers' playoff chances? From there, we will talk a little bit about the discourse involving Deion Sanders and the Dallas Cowboys. It was a big topic of conversation on Tuesday. Deion has already said he has zero interest. What does it mean? What does it not mean? What if Shador goes? All that good stuff. And then we will get to some college hoops. Purdue Marquette, Tuesday night. By the way, Dan Hurley with some very interesting comments about the state of his Huskies. And also, Mark Pope, I thought, said something very interesting after Kentucky rolled past Lipscomb. So we got ourselves a busy show. We're going to cover a lot of ground. Before we get started, a couple quick reminders. First of all, make sure you're subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. New clips, new videos going up every single day. New episodes usually on Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. This week a little bit different, but make sure that you are subscribed. Also, make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcast. You want to do Torres a solid. Subscribe on Apple, subscribe on Spotify, download us there. And if you want to really do me a solid, leave a 5-star rating and review. So thank you for your support. Make sure you're locked in. Drop your comments in the comment section. Want to hear what you have to say about the college football playoff rankings. Before we get started on today's show, one other announcement, and that is that we are so happy to welcome back our partners, our friends, Collie Puffs and ColliePuffs.com. So listen, it's college football season, college basketball season. Maybe you watch the NFL on Sundays. You're on the couch all day long, every day, watching sports, and you're looking for both a healthy snack, but a delicious snack to munch on while you're watching college football, Thursday night NFL, Sunday night football, Monday night football, college basketball during the week. That's where you want Collie Puffs, okay? These are the healthy alternatives to the Doritos, the Fritos, the unhealthy stuff in your grocery aisle. But here's the best part. They are healthy, but they are also delicious. But the key part is they are, in fact, healthy, okay? Baked, not fried, avocado oil, healthy ingredients, but they taste freaking delicious. At this point, I've been telling you about them for months, but here's the good part. You don't got to take my word for it. All you got to do is try them out for yourself. You can go to ColliePuffs.com, but here's the cool part. If you are listening, starting on Thursday, so it's Wednesday today, but starting Thursday, Collie Puffs will have a special Black Friday sale on Amazon.com. So they are available on Amazon. If you throw a couple bags in your cart just to try them, guess what? 25% automatically off. No codes, no promos, no nothing. Just throw a box or two in your cart and you will not regret them. These are the healthy alternative to the unhealthy food in your snack aisle, but they taste delicious. And I promise you, you will like them. Shout out to ColliePuffs.com. All right, with that said, busy midweek show. There is no more time to waste. So let's go ahead and get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, my goodness, boy, oh boy, oh boy, do we have some insanity to talk about in college football. By the way, you can see on the screen, there's a Ray Lewis reference. There was a report earlier today that Adam Schefter said Ray Lewis could be a candidate for the FAU job. That was shot down by multiple insiders. So I don't know if Schefter's just doing Ray Lewis or his agent or whomever a favor, but I very simply bring it up to say we won't be talking about that. But today the focus is on Indiana. And give me one sec here. All right. So, all right, let's get to the topic of the day. Let's not waste any more time here. And let's get to what was just a fascinating conversation on Tuesday night. Okay. So Tuesday night, college football playoff rankings come out. As I just said, we decided to wait until after the rankings. And I am so glad we did, because I did not expect to see what I saw on the screen when I turned on the TV. Okay. So I'll just be transparent, is that, listen, we've been doing these college football playoff rankings for a while. The bottom line is that when they come out, generally speaking, you sit there and say, okay, they don't really matter that much. Everything will figure itself out on the field. But this year, 12-team playoff, I'm paying a little bit closer attention. And I turned it on Tuesday night. And one thing immediately stood out to me the second I turned it on. It was that this was not a college football playoff rankings show. This was a bash Indiana football show and tell everyone and tell America how terrible Indiana football is. The second the show started, before the rankings even came out, I saw people at ESPN saying, listen, if they don't beat Ohio State this weekend, I don't know if they should be in. If they don't keep it close, they need to be eliminated from the playoff conversation. It was wild. I couldn't believe it. And I want to talk about the Indiana conundrum when it comes to this year's college football playoff rankings and college football playoff field. Because the bottom line is that right now, if everybody kind of wins the games they're supposed to, there's essentially going to be 13 teams, that are kind of playoff worthy if you include the automatic bids. So there's going to be 13 teams that are playoff worthy, and there's really only going to be 12 spots. And so we got to tear down somebody. We got to pick apart somebody else's resume to elevate everybody else. We've done it in the 4-team era with schools like Cincinnati, Notre Dame, whoever. And this year, Indiana is the whipping boy. I don't like it, but it seems pretty obvious to me that they are going to be the team that if they don't beat Ohio State this weekend, everyone is going to question, and I'll be transparent. I think there is some argument. I think there is some debate, but I also think they are being held to an impossible standard, because I think what's being held against them is two things. They are not a blue blood brand, and they're not in the SEC, and the SEC sucks up so much of the oxygen and conversation of college football. So let's go ahead and dive into what I am calling the Indiana conundrum, okay? So bottom line with Indiana is we know the story and we know the resume. Right now they are 10-0. Right now they have 0 wins over ranked opponents. And right now the only big game the rest of the regular season is Ohio State. The issue becomes that basically Ohio State is going to be their only good chance to get a resume boosting win at 10-0. You look at Indiana's resume. The best win they have right now is against Washington, who is currently sitting at 6-5, 0 ranked teams. Now, I would sit there and say it's not that much worse than the teams ranked 3 and 4 ahead of them. Texas has 0 ranked wins, but remember, they will play A&M to end the regular season. If they win that game, I think it's pretty hard to keep them out of the playoff, even if they were to lose in the SEC championship game. Penn State, also worth noting, has 1 ranked win. 23rd ranked Illinois. Thought it was funny. Greg McElroy, the second they appeared on the screen, Greg McElroy joked. He said, oh, well, there's the win that Penn State needs, and kind of tongue-in-cheek, like the committee did this to make Penn State look good. And so when it comes to Indiana, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that this is a team that, in my opinion, absolutely has an airtight, closed-door case about the college football playoff. And when I look at them, I tend to agree with most of you. The resume is not that great. They don't have a lot of great wins, but what I would say is a couple things. One, I don't hear anybody talking about bad losses, right? Like, if we're going to talk about the fact that Indiana's 10-0 with no great wins, they've won their 10 games by about an average of 30 points per game, okay? So they've won by an average of 30 points per game. And here's the bottom line, is that if we're going to argue that they have no great wins, but they've been completely dominant, here's the counter to that. Everybody's played bad teams, and guess what? Indiana has had 0 bad losses. So we have to factor in the fact that Ole Miss has a bad loss to Kentucky. That who else am I missing here? That Tennessee has a bad loss to Arkansas. They're trying to get rid of Sam Pittman. So I just bring it up to say we have to be fair. We have to be reasonable. I understand the resume isn't great. And the other thing I would say about Indiana is the fact that, you know what they're really being hurt by? It has nothing to do with the committee or this or that. It's the fact that with these imbalanced schedules in college football going forward, it's going to be impossible to put together a schedule in the league office that makes everybody happy and everybody balanced. You look at Indiana's schedule. I keep being told they haven't played anybody in conference. Okay. They haven't played the top teams. They haven't played Penn State. They haven't played Oregon. They haven't yet played Ohio State. They have played the defending champion Michigan, though. It's not Indiana's fault that Michigan stinks. It's not Indiana's fault that Washington was 12-0 last year and is now 6-5. And so I'm not going to blame them. I'm not going to hold it against them. And let me take it a step further, because I do think there are two realities about Indiana that we need to address that are absolutely in play in the criticism of Indiana right now. It is the fact that they are not a blue blood program historically in football, and they don't play in the SEC. And the SEC is trying like hell to get 5 teams into this field, and Indiana is the team standing in the way. In terms of the blue blood conversation, and I saw this argument from people on social media the other night, I don't want to hear it, okay? Here's the bottom line, is that if Michigan had the exact same resume as Indiana right now, there would be no doubt that they are a playoff team. They'd probably be number 2 in the country, number 3 in the country, behind only Oregon right now. If Michigan had Indiana's resume, 10-0, 30-point wins in basically every game, we wouldn't be having this debate. The reason it is being held against Indiana is because historically Indiana has not been great. Historically, Indiana has not been Penn State, Michigan, whatever. And I'm sorry, nobody would be going into this game this weekend. And I know Michigan doesn't play Ohio State with 1 week left in the regular season. But if Michigan was 10-0 going against Ohio State in a 12-team playoff era, nobody would be saying, yeah, Michigan loses this game, or if they lose and it's not pretty, they don't get in the field. Maybe in a 4-team era, we would have. We would not be saying that in 2024, okay? So that's one. 2, just look at Penn State. If you want to argue that Indiana is being treated completely fairly like anybody else would in the situation because their resume stinks, yeah, I disagree. Why is Penn State ranked ahead of Indiana? Penn State's best win is against a lousy Illinois team. So Illinois is 7-3. Washington 6-5. So we're saying that Penn State is better with a loss than Indiana because they beat a bad Illinois team. By the way, they didn't even beat them that good. And so I look at this situation. If Michigan had the same resume, we wouldn't be saying they need to beat Ohio State to get into a 12-team playoff, and 11-1 would get them in. And 11-1, by the way, is absolutely going to get Penn State in with their best win over Illinois. And I tweeted that out and I said the same thing. What I think is also interesting, let's also use the opposite part of this conversation as well, because I tweeted this as well, is everybody says, no, brand bias doesn't matter. Indiana hasn't played anybody. Okay, well then let's have an honest conversation. Let's pretend that it was week 10 or week 13, 10 games in, and I know that Ohio State can't play Ohio State. But let's say Ohio State had the same resume right now as Indiana. Not only would nobody be arguing that Ohio State does not belong in the college football playoff with a loss this weekend, you know what we would be saying? That Ohio State is one of the greatest teams that we've ever seen in the history of college. Think about it. 10-0, doesn't matter the resume. Winning by an average of 30 points, winning by an average of 30 points per game, we'd be talking about Ohio State as one of the great teams that we've ever seen. Nobody would be saying, well, if they don't win this weekend, what's the resume? No, we'd be like, no, it's Ohio State. So there's no doubt that brand bias is being held against Indiana. And let's look at the other thing that's being held against Indiana. They ain't in the SEC, and the SEC, listen, this was a fun, cool, cute story until Indiana might actually take a playoff spot from them, okay? So let's go ahead and dive into this. We talked about this element of it on Sunday's Aaron Torres pod. SEC is in a tricky spot. Now, I think it's a little early to just presume that there's going to be Selection Sunday chaos, because I think there's probably something coming. Somebody's going to lose somewhere along the way. But the SEC basically right now is trending to have 5 playoff caliber teams and probably only going to get 4 spots. Because remember, you will have 5 auto bids into this league, into this college football playoff. You'll have 7 at large. Right now, if Indiana wins out, if Penn State wins out, or if Indiana loses to Ohio State, but they win out, you're going to get Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Indiana from the Big Ten. You'll get the G5, Big 12, and ACC champion. That's 7 teams. You'll get Notre Dame, which is 8, and there will be 5 playoff caliber teams from the SEC, and one of them is going to get left out. Those 5 teams, the winner of Texas A&M. We talked about how big that game is. Again, assuming Texas A&M wins at Auburn this weekend, assuming that Texas beats Kentucky. You have the winner of that game. And then you have the 4 lost teams. You have Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. And so if everybody wins out, we're going to have 5 teams for 4 spots in the SEC. And that is where the issue comes in. Because God forbid the SEC doesn't miss out on having a 5th team in the college football playoff. And I'm sorry, I don't have sympathy. Because one, let me say this. Again, Ohio State will have no great wins, but they'll have no bad losses. And I'm not saying that I love the idea of Ole Miss missing this playoff field because of a loss to Kentucky in September. I'm not saying that I love the idea of Tennessee missing this field because of a loss to Arkansas very early in the season. But we also, if we're going to talk about great wins, we have to talk about bad losses as well. And those are bad losses. By the way, if somehow, whatever, Texas loses to Kentucky, even if, there's just so many variables. But I don't think that just because Indiana has no great wins, they should be punished if they have no bad losses. And so to me, what this comes down to, the SEC's got to tear somebody down to make sure that they get their playoff spot. I can't tear down Notre Dame because what's Notre Dame's best win? A Texas A&M team that's in first place in the SEC. Not going to tear down Penn State because they're the blue blood. Not going to tear down Oregon because they're in position to make the college football playoff as the at-large bid. So it ends up being Indiana. And so I actually thought the person who articulated this best, and I should have probably popped the tweet up earlier, but Ari Wasserman from The Athletic had a great tweet. He said, what's happening is Indiana is a threat to the SEC getting a 5th team in the playoff. That's when the fun stops. That's when it's not cute anymore. So now we're hearing a lot of Indiana hasn't played anybody comments, which have overwhelmingly replaced the fake cheers from expansionists who pretended to want this. Great tweet, Ari Wasserman. I don't know him, but I loved what he had to say. And I think he's right. And I think And I think what's kind of funny is if Texas A&M is not a good example. If Alabama loses to Oklahoma this weekend and all of a sudden they're a 3-loss team with 2 pretty bad losses, no one's going to hate Indiana anymore. But what is obvious is that Indiana is standing in the way of a 5th playoff spot. And I think that's where my frustration comes in. It's not that I'm some Indiana football homer. Okay. I've been called a lot of things in my life, never been called an Indiana football homer. But what frustrates me is 2 things. Is one, it's just so transparent. It's so obvious that, listen, I think ESPN, we all understand they have the SEC exclusively. We understand that they want the biggest brands, the biggest names. They control all of the playoff. I think there's one game that's on Turner, but other than that, everything else is on ESPN. And so I solely bring it up because they so clearly want the SEC to thrive. But then 2, my frustration is whether it's Indiana, whether it's the group of 5 bid, whether it's whatever, I thought the whole reason we expanded this playoff was to include more types of teams. I thought the whole reason we expanded the college football playoff was so a group of 5 team could get in. So some non-traditional power conference teams could get in. So that when the Big 12 doesn't have a national championship contender, they're still represented, right? That was what I was sold. We need West Coast representation in this event. It had become an SEC, ACC with Clemson-dominated event. The West Coast, we need this. But also, I think the other frustrating part was the idea that we also said that this was about inclusion. This was about involving everybody and that we needed to decide a championship on the field, right? That was the big thing. In the BCS era, it was computers. In last year, the 14 playoff era, what was the conversation? It was about, how do we really know who's ranked ahead of who? And why does this team get that? It's like, well, now you put 12 teams in, it gets decided on the field. And at some point, resumes have to matter. Regular season has to matter. And oh, by the way, bad losses have to matter as well. If we're going to put in a 10-2 Ole Miss team that lost to a bad Kentucky team, if we're going to put in a 10-2 Tennessee team that lost to a bad Arkansas team, what's even the point of playing the regular season? But what really frustrates me is the idea that, again, this was all supposed to be decided on the field. Yet all I've heard for the last 36, 48 hours, whatever it's been as this poll has come out and leading up to the ranking, all I've heard is, well, if Indiana played Tennessee's schedule, well, if Indiana played Ole Miss's schedule, well, Indiana doesn't. They play the games that are scheduled. It's not their fault that Michigan stinks. It's not their fault that Washington stinks. And I'm sorry, Ole Miss, Tennessee, you guys are the ones that took bad losses. You guys are the ones, by the way, that invited Texas and Oklahoma into your league and made the league tougher and made there be one more team, two when Oklahoma's good, to get over the hump in this league. If Texas is in the Big 12 right now, it's not an issue. So I could go on, but I don't feel bad for Indiana, but I don't think we should be tearing them down just to prop everybody else up. It was unbelievable watching the committee selection show the other night because I could not believe how they were talking about Indiana. It's like, dude, they haven't even played yet. And by the way, one last thing, I know I'm going super long here because we need to take a quick break. The funny thing is, I think something weird is going to happen these next few weeks. And if Indiana loses to Ohio State, they'll still get in because either Notre Dame's going to take a weird loss, maybe at USC, Ole Miss maybe against Florida this week. Maybe it'll be whoever. Maybe it'll be Texas A&M, Auburn, and then Texas A&M beats Texas. By the way, that'll be the fun one. That's the next big thing. Ole Miss is going to take a loss at Florida this week, and then I'm going to hear why a 3-loss Ole Miss team should be an over a 1-loss Indiana team. So it's an interesting conversation, but I had to get that off my chest because I'm sorry. But Indiana, if they go 11-1, if they were Michigan, if they were Penn State, if they were Ohio State, they would get in. And this is about them not being a blue blood and them not being in the SEC. All right, see the chat humming. A lot of people are fired up. Cannot wait to get to some of your comments. What we're going to do, though, we're going to take a quick break, come back. When we come back, we'll answer some of your questions, some of your comments. And then I do want to talk a little bit about the rumors and conversation that popped up over the last couple of days. Deion Sanders, could he be interested? Would he be interested in the Cowboys job? This was a wild 24-hour news cycle. Take a quick break, come back, talk Coach Prime with the Cowboys. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Maura Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Deion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All right, everybody. Hi, back. Good to be back. Really quick, producer Matt, do we have any commentary or thoughts on the college football playoff in the ranks? Okay, so here the New Life says Texas beat Michigan and Oklahoma when both were ranked early in the season. Indiana beat Michigan 2. It's ridiculous. Listen, and I think this is the other thing. Listen, I understand Indiana didn't play any Power 5 teams, Power 4 teams in the out of conference, but I think that's what makes it tough between the imbalanced schedules in these power conferences and between the fact you just never know who's going to be good in the out of conference. It's just hard for me to get super fired up because you put together a schedule that you thought was good and some teams, disappointed. Like look at Tennessee. Tennessee plays NC State on a neutral. Tennessee is ranked at the time those two teams played. Tennessee, it turns out NC State is terrible. And it's like, I'm not saying that should be the be all end all, but I'm not saying that like Tennessee should be punished. I do think the New Life brings up an interesting point though. I keep being told that, like everyone keeps saying that Michigan is not a good win for Indiana, and I tend to agree. But I don't hear anybody saying, well, Texas didn't play anybody. Well, they tried to. They tried to play Michigan, and I understand, by the way. I think Texas, by the way, because I've seen a lot of this, like when I put out the brand bias comment, I had a lot of people say, well, Torres, what do you mean there's brand bias? Everyone's saying the same thing about Texas. If they lose, they'll get left out of the playoff. Texas is different from Indiana. Texas already has a loss. Yeah, if Texas takes a second loss to Texas A&M and they have 0 ranked wins and lost to the only 2 good teams on their resume, that's different than Indiana being 11-1, beating everybody by 30 and losing to the best team that they play in Ohio State. I will say this, by the way, I just defended Indiana for 20, 25 minutes, whatever that was, to lead the show. I will also add that I do think it's important that Indiana shows out well. I am willing to revisit this conversation if Indiana loses 56-3 on Saturday in Columbus. I don't think that they will, but I'm willing to at least listen to the conversation. By the way, we did start previewing all of our all the Week 13 games on the college football betting YouTube channel. Matt, after we get to these questions, have linked to that channel as well. If you could do Torres a solid and subscribe there, I would appreciate it. We did all of our long form previews there. We'll also have some previews on the Thursday show of Week 13. Producer Matt, what else we got? Anything else? Alabama played Mercer this week. Don't give a crap about Indiana's non-conference schedule, and the schedule was made at a time when UM, Penn State, and Ohio State were given. That's a great point. And I saw somebody make this point as well, is like, don't forget, Indiana got the short end of the stick every single year for 15 years since we went to divisions because they had to play Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State every single year. Let me say this. I thought Ross Dellinger did a great piece on Wednesday morning. I didn't fully realize this. When Indiana fired Tom Allen last year, they actually had like internal conversations about, should we really go all in on football? Is this ever going to happen? Should we just put all of our money towards basketball and women's basketball and non-revenue sports? And Scott Dolson, their AD, basically understands what we all do, is that if you fall too far behind in college football, you're going to get left behind. And so credit Indiana for going full speed ahead on football and for finding the right guy and for keeping the right guy, because Curt Cignetti obviously just signed an extension. But yeah, no, I agree, is that everyone has strengths and weaknesses on their resume. But I just go back to if Michigan had the same resume as Indiana, 10-0 coming into this game, nobody, but with an average margin of victory by 30 points, nobody would be saying that Michigan has to win or it has to be competitive or they're out of a 12-team playoff. It just doesn't work. So I don't buy it. Producer Matt, anything else before we switch gears, talk about those Deion Dallas Cowboys rumors? All right. With that said, let's go ahead and switch gears. I do want to stay in the college football space. And I do want to talk about just a wild story that kind of just emerged out of nowhere on Tuesday. By the way, make sure you're following our Torres on CU page for all things Torres on Colorado, all of my segments, my clips, etc. We have team-specific pages, okay? So let's go ahead and dive into this. And I'll be honest, and this story was kind of wild to me, and I'll tell you what. Is transparently, I don't consume a lot of other sports media. It's not because I'm high and mighty and I think I'm better than everybody else or anything like that. It's just I'm busy prepping my own show, watching games, talking to sources, whatever. And so I bring it up because very rarely do I see a story evolve over the course of the day and a take begin to explode like a mushroom cloud, okay? But that's exactly what happened on Tuesday. So Tuesday, the Dallas Cowboys are, of course, coming off that embarrassing loss on Monday night to the Houston Texans. Dallas is awful. They're one of the worst teams in the league, if not the worst. I watch a lot of Sunday football. I'm done with Dallas. Like, they just are not interesting to me. They're not good. I said on this show last year, they should have fired Mike McCarthy last year. They didn't, whatever. I actually think they should have fired Mike McCarthy several years ago, which we'll get into in a minute. But I bring it up because on the heels of Dallas getting smoked again, I was watching Get Up while I was working out in the morning. Get Up's the Mike Greenberg show. Louis Riddick's on it. They do a really good job. And so right away, it goes from the Cowboys stink to, who they need to hire is Deion Sanders, former Cowboy. We know the story, this and that. And what was crazy about the whole thing was I saw the take kind of evolve over the course of the day. So it started with the Cowboys need to hire Deion. Then it became the Cowboys got to figure out a way to get Shador with Deion to Dallas as well. And what I will say is this, listen, I'm a college football guy, love college football, love the NFL as well. But what I would also say transparently is this. If Deion goes to the Cowboys, I think it will be fantastic. I think it'll be fun. I think it will be awesome. I just don't think that we have to keep doing this because I don't think Coach Prime wants to go anywhere. He actually addressed it in his Tuesday media availability. He says he's not going anywhere. And until further notice, I think we got to stop putting Coach Prime in a bunch of jobs that he doesn't want. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive into this. First of all, let me say this. Let me take a half a second here. And let me give myself a little pat on the back. So we've been doing this podcast for like 5-6 years now. It's been on video for about the last 2.5 or so. Okay. And the reason I bring it up is because back when this was an audio only podcast, I did this take and I can't lie. This was one of the great takes that I have ever had doing this show. And the take was pretty straightforward. It goes back 3 years. If you remember, the Cowboys have lost in the first round of the playoffs 3 straight years. Okay. Last year it was to the Packers. They get embarrassed at home. The year before they lose to the 49ers on the road. I guess that was technically the second round maybe, but they lose to the 49ers on the road. And then the year before they lost at home to the 49ers in a game where they could not spike the ball. They didn't know how to spike the ball. And on that show the next day, and it was audio only, I wish I could pull out the video clip, but I said 3 things. I said, you have to fire Mike McCarthy right now. And people said, you're crazy. It's overreactionary. It's one playoff loss. They win 12 games during the regular season, whatever. And I said, here is why you have to fire him. I said, there are 2 reasons really. One, the inability to run a 2-minute drill to spike the football is the bigger picture issue with Mike McCarthy. His teams are talented, except for this year. We'll get to that in a minute. But his teams are talented, but they are mistake prone. The details are the issue with the Cowboys. They don't know how to run a 2-minute drill. They don't know how to spike the football. Historically, they've been towards the top of the NFL in penalties under Mike McCarthy. Those are details. Those are small things. Those are correctable things with the right coach. Beyond that, why I said 3 years ago they had to make the move then was because I said, you can go back and listen. You can find it in the archives. I think it would be January of 2022. I would have said this, okay? I said, you have to make the move now because you have a very small window where Dak Prescott, yes, he has an expensive contract, okay? But at the same time, the contract was getting less expensive as more guys signed. But you also, at the time, you had CeeDee Lamb on a rookie contract. You had Micah Parsons on a rookie contract. You had Trevon Diggs, who was playing really well at the time, on a rookie contract. And I said, you have 2 years while all these guys are on rookie contracts. You have to take advantage of this window right now. And I did say, actually, this was the best part of the take. I said, you should go hire Nick Saban. Because at the time we knew Nick Saban only had 2 or 3 years left. He's pay him $25 million a year, whatever, double his salary at Alabama. But Nick Saban is a detail-oriented guy, a process-oriented guy, and the talent was there in Dallas. Instead, Dallas did nothing, and we now see that I was 100% right. They had a 2-year window before all of these deals came up, and they missed the window. And now CeeDee's getting paid. Dak's got a new contract. Micah wants a new contract, and they're a total cluster. And so to get full circle back to Deion, one, that's why I don't think he's taking the job, is first off, it's a total mess. And for Coach Prime, listen, I don't think he's going to be at Colorado for 25 years, but he has a good thing going. By the way, we talked about it on Sunday's show. He had the biggest recruiting weekend maybe in the history of Colorado football this past weekend. Several 5-stars, several 4-stars. Bunch of kids from IMG Academy. They're going to get a Julian Lewis flip here in the next couple of days, whenever it is before National Signing Day. So he has it good right now. So one, I don't think that we need to go, I don't think he needs to take a bad job, even if he has ties to that job. But then beyond that, what I would also say is this. I think he genuinely loves coaching college football. And so to me, that's the frustrating part watching it from a distance, is just let this guy enjoy being the Colorado football coach. I think it's 2 things at Colorado. One is, first off, this is important to note. Rick George, the AD at Colorado, was the only guy at the Power 5 level, Power 4 level that believed in him. I think that matters. Remember, He was a free agent. He was available in a year where Arizona State was open. Now, they made the right hire with Kenny Dillingham, but Auburn was open. All these schools were open. And I saw an article last week, well, Auburn, what if Auburn had hired Coach Prime? It's like, if Auburn hired Coach Prime, no disrespect, producer Matt, but you know the truth, they wouldn't have let Coach Prime be Coach Prime. And so what Rick George saw was that I want Coach Prime, but I want the entire package. I want the confidence. I want the swagger. I want Coach Prime to be Coach Prime. That is the guy I want as my head coach. So I think he's loyal to Rick George, but beyond that, I think he just likes coaching college football. I don't think he's leaving for another job. Maybe in a year or two if Florida State opens, but he's not trying to climb the ladder. He likes Colorado, and I really think he just genuinely enjoys coaching young men and seeing boys become men. I thought it was interesting. I saw a clip of Dan Hurley, the UConn basketball coach, a few days ago, talking about the impact that the Lakers interview had for him. Because what he realized while interviewing for the Lakers was, I really like being a college coach, and I really like the fact that I can be, I'm basically touching these kids at the last point before they become men and the last point before I can have an impact on who they become as men. He talked about the idea that once guys get to the pros, and I'm paraphrasing now, but he said, look, they have houses, they're away from the facility, they come into work, it's only work, they have wives, they have children, they have whatever. When they're in college, they're living on campus. They're all eating meals together. They're traveling together. They're doing, and he just said, I love the idea that I can have an impact on the man that they become. And I truly believe that Coach Prime sees it as the exact same thing. I think he really likes going into an 18-year-old kid's house or having an 18-year-old kid on campus and saying, you come here 3 or 4 years, I'm going to turn you into a man. I'm going to make you a better person. I'm going to make you a better husband and make you a better father down the road. But you got to come here to Colorado. And so I don't think he wants to go to the NFL. I don't think he wants to go to the league. I don't think he wants to go deal with Micah Parsons said this on a podcast, and now he's got to address it in the locker room, and this guy's holding out for a contract, and this guy's doing this. I think he genuinely likes college football. So let him have this moment. By the way, the last thing I would say before we get to some hoops is the Shedeur element of it was the weirdest part, because I'm not sure if you heard. Dallas has a quarterback who's going to make $60 million next year. And I know what people say, oh, you could trade Dak, and there's an opportunity to trade Dak, and somebody will take him. And it's like, really? I think Dak's good, but you're gonna trade for him to make $60 million a year? I'm sorry, I don't think whoever it is, I don't think the New York Giants, I don't think the Las Vegas Raiders want $60 million Dak when they could probably just get Shedeur or start over with another rookie as well. I don't think it's the best quarterback class in college in the NFL. But I don't think you're taking Dak Prescott either. So this idea that, oh, just trade for Shedeur, trade for the number one pick, get Shedeur and bring Deion. It's like, yeah, that sounds great if you can get the number one pick. I just don't know how Dallas is going to get the number one pick with Dak Prescott. Who is going to take Dak Prescott off their hands? And oh, by the way, they're not going to bench Dak Prescott as a $60 million quarterback. So we don't talk a ton of NFL, but I did think that was a fun and sort of interesting topic. I appreciate everybody chiming in on it. But I'm here to tell you, man, we got to stop pretending like Coach Prime is just itching to get out of Colorado. He's going to leave someday. Again, I don't think it's going to be for the NFL. I don't think it's even going to be for another college job unless it is like a Florida State or a place that feels like home to him. I think he's loyal to Colorado. And oh, by the way, I didn't even mention this. He addressed multiple times that he's not interested. He said it at his press conference. And as a matter of fact, producer Matt, I think we have the sound. He was actually asked about this by Michael Irvin on Speak on FS1. Producer Matt, go ahead and play the sound if you have it.
People to be better than they really are, besides Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I know you focus day to day. I know you're a day-to-day man. But can you think about some days?
Let me take the computer here, because you starting to talk that talk. I got to show you where I am. I love it where I am.
What are you trying to say? What are you trying to say?
I love it where I am. I love it. I love it where I am.
That was Coach Prime on Speak last week. By the way, I also saw Michael Irvin claim that he has sources that say that Coach Prime would go to the NFL if Shedeur would go with him. I don't buy it. Again, maybe if it's the Cowboys, maybe if they somehow get the number 1 pick, which I don't really think is on the table, I just don't think anybody's trading that pick. And I still don't know what you do with Dak Prescott. So we can move on, but I thought that was a wild discourse to kind of watch over the course of over the last couple hours because man, oh man, it came out of nowhere. It was all Cowboys related. And next thing you know, everybody's handing Coach Prime the Cowboys head coaching job. All right, really quickly, let's go ahead and wrap on some college hoops. Nothing super major over the last couple days in college hoops. Next week, by the way, is going to be crazy. By the way, on the Thursday show, we'll preview the Friday night Arizona-Duke game. Just did my buddy Mike Luke's podcast where we previewed Arizona-Duke. But we'll preview Arizona-Duke. We'll talk Maui Invitational, which starts Monday. By the way, UConn is playing that. We'll get to UConn in a second. First off, just a couple results from Tuesday night in college hoops. We did have one top 25 matchup. Purdue goes to Marquette. Purdue, of course, was coming off of that big home win over Alabama. By the way, thank you to all the lovely Purdue fans that felt it necessary to tag me and let me know that Alabama lost to Purdue. I was aware. I watched the game. It was actually a very fun game. But Purdue goes on Tuesday night to Marquette. Marquette takes care of business 76-58. Listen, I don't think there's a ton of takeaways on this. College basketball, listen, you're going to go on the road and lose sometimes. And this isn't a Torres tear down Purdue segment. But I'll say about Purdue, this might be unpopular. I actually think they're more fun to watch without Zach Edey. Listen, everyone thinks I hate Zach Edey. I don't really care about Zach Edey. I have no personal relationship with him, no personal vendetta against him. But Purdue's actually more fun to watch without him. I mean, they have the Trey Kaufman-Red kid who's like a traditional 6'8", 6'9" center, and they play 5 out. And he has been awesome. He was great against Alabama. He had 16 on Tuesday night against Marquette. And then from the Marquette perspective, I thought that Cam Jones had maybe the best game I've seen in college basketball this year. Guard, 17 points, 13 rebounds, 10 assists, the triple-double for Cam Jones. And, listen, one, I give him a ton of credit. He played phenomenally. Two, I just got to give Shaka Smart a ton of credit, man. This is a guy, he's building it differently. He's not doing it through the portal. He's not doing it through one and dones. The stat that John Rothstein threw out the other day, these are 2 of the few teams in college basketball. They didn't take a single transfer portal player last offseason. So Marquette gets the win. I still think they're probably the second best team in the Big East behind UConn. We're going to talk UConn in a minute. But Marquette gets the win. Thought they were super impressive. By the way, this isn't a teardown of Purdue. I think they're going to be fine. It's tough to go on the road. Ask Alabama that lost at Purdue. Ask Arizona that lost at Wisconsin. Ask North Carolina that lost it at Kansas. It's tough to go on the road, but Marquette gets the win. Fun game, though. I was actually out to dinner, was eating dinner at a bar, and got to watch the whole thing start to finish. So fun one there. Really quickly, Gonzaga takes care of San Diego State. Don't think there's much here. Gonzaga, what I'll say is they got an interesting couple weeks because they're going to Atlantis where they will play Arizona, where they could potentially play Arizona. They could potentially play Indiana. They could potentially play Louisville. Oh, by the way, they have Kentucky and Seattle in December. They have UConn at Madison Square Garden in December. So the schedule doesn't get very much easier, but they go to San Diego State. They get an 80-67 win. Listen, if I'm going to say it's no big deal that Purdue lost on the road, got to give Gonzaga credit because they go on the road. I've been to Viejas Arena. It is a very, very, very hostile environment. It's a tough place to play, and Gonzaga is just a veteran team. Graham Ike, 23 points, 9 boards in this game. Ryan Nembhard, he's quietly starting to play like an All-American, 19 points, 10 assists. Of course, he played at Creighton before transferring to Gonzaga last year. So Gonzaga gets the win. Again, I have a feeling we'll be talking about them a lot more because they are going to Atlantis next week. And also, they'll play Kentucky in a few weeks. They will play UConn as well. Speaking of UConn, oh, buddy, we got to talk about what Dan Hurley had to say following UConn's game on Tuesday night against, how about this? They played East Texas A&M. I'll be transparent, people. I've been covering college sports a long time. I think I know about as much on college sports as anybody. Can't lie. Your boy has never heard of East Texas A&M. So shout out to East Texas A&M. They went to Gamble Pavilion on Tuesday night. And UConn, in a not surprising result, beat East Texas A&M 81-46. Here's the issue. UConn only what's the right way to put it? The margin in the second half was only 13 points. They got out to an early first half lead. They kind of took their foot off the gas. They only outscored East Texas A&M, by 13 in the second half in what ended up being a 35-point win. Well, I'll tell you what, 13-point margin in the second half. Dan Hurley was not happy about that. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Just comically bad. Second half rebounding so far below standard. Ball security throughout the game, it's been a long time since we've been that bad. To go negative assist to turnover ratio, we're one of the best passing and ball security teams in the country. So, I think at times we played hard, but once we got up to 37, with 12 minutes to go, and it turned into just a debacle out there.
So there's Dan Hurley calling Tuesday night's performance comically bad. Again, I apologize if the audio wasn't great there. Nothing we could do. A couple of the reporters on the scene had it, so I apologize the audio wasn't great. But how about Dan Hurley calling his team's second half performance comically bad? Okay, so a couple things stand out. Three things stand out. One, not wrong. Two, I actually think that's a great sign for UConn and a bad sign for everybody else. Let's go ahead and dive in very quickly. In terms of why he's not wrong, listen, UConn, I'll be transparent. I'm a UConn guy. I'm not going to deny it. Oh, my hair. I need a haircut. Listen, watch every UConn game. And what I would say is each of the last two seasons, it really did feel like pretty early on, you're like, oh, this team is really good and they can absolutely win a national championship. Okay. 2 years ago, remember they went to the PK 85 event that was in Portland and destroyed everybody. Get to number 2 in the country in December. They had a couple bad weeks in January, but they were the best team from start to finish in college basketball that year. Last year was like, wow. I remember second or third game, it was like, oh my goodness, this team is unbelievable. I was like, they might be better than last year. And so UConn, I said it last year, they were kind of like the most boring team in college basketball to actually talk about, because first the conversation was, are they good enough to go back to back? In 3 games, you're like, yeah, they are. Then it's like, are they better than the year before? And it's like probably by January, you're like, oh, this team has a chance to be better. So what is different this year? The team has not come out of the gates full speed ahead. Now, that's not a bad thing because first off, they are 4-0, but they've had some struggles. They played New Hampshire early in the season. And in that game against New Hampshire, they were only up by 9 at the half. Obviously, they weren't great in the second half against East Texas A&M. And I think it's worth noting, coming into Tuesday night, they actually had the number 1 point differential in the second half in a positive way. And it was because they were struggling out of the gate in these early season games. So they're not playing well. But why I love that from Dan Hurley is because, and why I'd be excited if I'm a UConn fan, is because it means that, to use a Dan Hurleyism, foot on gas. The foot is still on the gas. He's not taking anything less than the standard. And that's what would have me so excited if I was a UConn fan, if I was somebody who followed this team, whatever, is, yeah, the team's been fine. And the schedule is certainly going to get tougher. They go to Maui this week. They play Baylor at home in a couple weeks, et cetera, et cetera. Gonzaga on a neutral court. But at the same time, what would have me excited is that Dan Hurley, when he says we were comically bad, that's his way of using the media, of telling his players, yeah, whatever that was that I just saw, that is not going to be tolerated here. And we've talked about it through the years with all of these great coaches, with Nick Saban, with Bill Belichick, with, I know he's not a great right now, but you read anything about Curt Cignetti, the new head coach at Indiana, and what those guys will tell you is, we play to a standard. That was Nick Saban's famous line. We play to a standard. We don't play an opponent. We don't play to a score. We play to a standard. And so you ask anybody who played for Nick Saban, they'll tell you some of the times that he was the maddest would be after a 40-point win against a bad team, as opposed to a 2-point win over a great team. Because he's saying, we didn't meet the standard today. Too many mistakes, too many penalties, too many turnovers, too many whatever. And that's what Dan Hurley was saying on Tuesday night. We didn't play to the UConn standard. We didn't play to the championship standard. To steal a great line from a great movie, no excuses, play like a champion, okay? That was what Dan Hurley was basically saying, was like, I'm sorry, but this is who we expect to be, and this is who we demand that you be. And if that's not good enough, we're going to find somebody else who will play to that standard because we're not going to tolerate it. So I love the quote from Dan Hurley. I love the transparency. I love the fact that he ain't putting up with crap from nobody. And if I'm a fan of another school, I'd be afraid because UConn is not even playing well and they're destroying everybody. And as somebody who has watched all of their games, like I'm sure a lot of UConn fans watching this video, watching listen to the podcast, whatever will tell you, they haven't come close to playing their best. And they haven't come close to playing their best. And oh, by the way, they still have 4 guys scoring double figures, a 5th guy's averaging 9 points per game. And I still think they're kind of in figure it out mode. You know, you look at some of the early season results, they weren't the best. The standard wasn't great. They could have played better, and they're still just trying to figure out their pieces. You know, Jaden Ross, who had a monster dunk on Tuesday night, didn't even play in the first game. You're trying to figure out, you know, how to fit in Liam McNeely, the freshman, Jalen Stewart, the sophomore, Solo Ball, the sophomore, Aiden Mahaney, the transfer. They've already shaken up the starting lineup, put Aiden Mahaney, the transfer, in, moved Hassan Diarra back to the 6-man spot. So I could go on and on. But if I was a fan of another school, I would be very, 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 very afraid. Because Dan Hurley, he ain't taking crap from nobody, including his players. He's holding his team to a standard. And I think the cool thing really quickly, by the way, is we're going to find out just how much work UConn has to do here in the coming weeks. They go to Maui. They open the Maui Invitational Tuesday afternoon. I think it's 2:30 Eastern, 11:30 Pacific. I could be wrong. I want to say 8:30 local time. I think that's right. Where they play Memphis. Then from there, they could play Michigan State. Obviously, Iowa State's in that field. They're really good. Carolina's in that field. Producer Matt's Auburn Tigers. So we're going to find out very quickly how good UConn is. By the way, as you can see on the screen, we also have our Torres on UConn page. And also, Producer Matt, if we have the Mora Hurley 24 tee, go ahead, pop that on the screen really quick. We got a couple left. Obviously, we will not be making any more after this season is over. After the season is over, because it's going to be Mora Hurley on to the next ticket. But if you want a last minute Christmas gift or an early Christmas gift, we have a couple left. Once they're gone for good. So go ahead and get that Mora Hurley 24 tee if it is available. We may not have it visually, but you can get it at AaronTorresOnline.com. All right, one last result from college football or college basketball, on I guess it would have been what? It would have been Tuesday night. Listen, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. But there is one more result that I do want to get to from Tuesday. And it was Kentucky absolutely destroying Lipscomb. Final score in that game, 97-68. Of course, why that's noteworthy. Kentucky, it's the first game back from Duke. It's also worth noting, and I promise I'm not trying to make this a Kentucky versus its former head coach segment, but Lipscomb played at Bud Walton Arena to open the season. It did not look like that when they played Arkansas, so one team clearly has more work to do. But Kentucky gets the victory 97-68. By the way, a couple interesting things came out of this. First of all, I saw this stat. First time that Kentucky has made 10 threes or more in their first 4 games of a season ever. Mark Pope was mad about that. He said, what about my 96 team? Are you sure that's right? All that good stuff. Jackson Robinson, as you can see on the screen, I think this is important, is that Jackson Robinson got going. Remember, he was the player that was projected to be the quote-unquote best player on this team. Well, Jackson Robinson finishes with 20 points. He played much better. And overall, just think it was a solid evening for Kentucky. It's not a game that's going to define their season. It's not a game that we're going to be talking about if Kentucky goes on a Final Four run or a national title run, but it's the way you want to look against the team that you should beat in the manner that they beat Lipscomb. By the way, I think it's also worth noting, I find it funny, all these media people now coming, is Kentucky a title contender? Is Kentucky going to win the SEC? It's like, Torres been telling you since Jackson Robinson finalized the roster in June or late May or whatever it was. It's like, this team's really good. I never understood the argument that they were anything other than a top 15 team. Now, I didn't have them top 5. I didn't have them top 3. I don't have them winning the national championship. But this idea that all these media outlets are like, well, you know who's really surprising people is Kentucky. It's like, really? The team that has 4 guys who averaged double figures last year, the best defensive guard in the portal, Lamont Butler, the best defensive big in the portal, Mari Williams, Kobe Brea, the best statistical three-point shooter. So, not very surprised that this team is good. But what I will say, and I think this is important, There was one thing that Mark Pope did say in his post-game press conference that I think has to have Kentucky fans excited, okay? And that is because, listen, good win, solid win. As I said, Jackson Robinson got going. But you know who else had a very good game? That would be friend of the Aaron Torres pod, buddy of mine. I love the kid. I've told you a million times. I've known him since he was probably 13, 14 years old. That was Lamont Butler. 16 points in that game. And oh, by the way, how about this from behind the three-point line for Lamont Butler? Lamont Butler finished that game 3 of 3 behind the three-point line, 6 of 8 from the field, 16 points in that game. So why do I bring it up? Well, it's because after the game, Mark Pope was asked about Lamont Butler, and he gave a very interesting answer that I think is worth noting. This is what Mark Pope said, direct quote from his post-game press conference. We don't have the video. Unfortunately, producer Matt had a busy morning. I had him pulling a bunch of other stuff, so I'll just read this quote. Mark Pope said on Lamont Butler, he said, he is an elite level shooter. Listen, and please don't get me in trouble for what I'm saying, because San Diego State coach Brian Dutcher is one of the greatest coaches in all of college basketball, and Lamont's run at San Diego State was brilliant. I mean, he couldn't have been any better. They couldn't have been any better. I mean, they went to a national championship game, but this is where it gets interesting. And I want to give the whole quote so it doesn't sound like he's throwing San Diego State on the bus. He said, but Lamont is going to be a way better shooter in our system because we shoot. That's what we do. It's a different style. Our emphases are different. It doesn't mean they're better or worse. It's just different. Lamont is an elite level shooter. So why do I bring this up? One, it's the middle of the week. There's not much going on in college hoops. But two, I hate to say it, but Torres told you so on this one. I know I get exhausting. Oh, Torres said this, Torres said that. But go back to the day that Lamont Butler committed to this team, because I remember the day. Because I had all you saying, oh, he's a defensive guard. He's going to be the sixth man. He's not even going to play. I said, no. I said two things. You go back and watch. It was, I think, first weekend in May, something like that, late April or in May. I said two things. I said, he's your starting point guard. I know Kirk Kriisa committed a few weeks later. All the other national analysts, oh, Kirk Kriisa is the starting point guard, and we'll see what Lamont Butler does. No. Torres told you. He's day one starter. Mark Pope, the second Lamont Butler went into the portal, Mark Pope got on a plane the next day and flew across country with his entire staff. If that doesn't tell you the priority that Lamont Butler was for this coaching staff and this program, I'm sorry, nothing will. But beyond that, and this is where it gets important, the other part that is worth noting, I told you, I said he's not just a defensive guy. Believe me when I tell you, this guy can get buckets too. It's just what he wasn't asked. It's just not what he was asked to do at San Diego State. And I know I'm going to go a little abstract here, but I said this a year ago with a kid by the name of Keyshawn Johnson, okay? Keyshawn Johnson played at San Diego State for 4 years, came in, I think, a year before Lamont at San Diego State, but he hits the portal, and I'm looking at all these portal lists, and he's like not even on them. And I'm like, that kid's really good. And he commits to Arizona, and I went on all the Arizona podcasts. I just mentioned my buddy Mike Luke. I was on his podcast today, actually. We were talking about Keyshawn Johnson. We were talking about this quote from Mark Pope about how guys are different once they get out of that San Diego State offense. And it doesn't mean that Brian Dutcher isn't a great coach. This isn't a tear down San Diego. It's San Diego State, excuse me. It's exactly what Mark Pope said. The two systems are different. The two coaching styles are different. It's not that San Diego State isn't a great program, but it is that whether it was Keyshawn Johnson last year at Arizona, whether it was Lamont Butler this year at Kentucky, the truth of the matter is just because they were never asked to do something doesn't mean they're not capable of it. You know, it's almost like an option quarterback in football. It's like just because they're not asked to throw the ball 30 times a game doesn't mean that if you give them the opportunity, they're incapable of doing it. And it was always the same with Lamont Butler. This is a kid that he can get you 17, 18 on a night. He just never had to do it at San Diego State because that's not what was asked. And here's the crazy part. I don't think that's what's going to be asked of him at Kentucky either. But what I do think is if he can get you 16, which he can, which we've been telling you since May that he can, here's the great part. That is a nice ancillary offensive piece to have in your back pocket because we all know that the bread is going to be buttered. By the way, I've used that term like 10 times in the last day. I don't know where that came from, but your bread is going to be buttered with Jackson Robinson, who got going in this game against Lipscomb. Of course, he struggled against Duke, but looked much better. You have Kobe Brea, who statistically is, again, already one of the, if not the best three-point shooters in all of college basketball. You have Kobe Brea. You have Jackson Robinson. You have Amari Williams. You don't need Lamont to be great on every single night. But the fact that he is, it could take this team to another level. And so this isn't going to be the day where I talk about, can Kentucky win a national championship? Can Kentucky go to the Final Four? Can Kentucky do this? Can Kentucky do that? But what I think we're seeing, and this is important, Mark Pope had a plan when he went into the portal. Everything was intentional. Everything was on purpose. Every piece had to fit with every other piece, but every piece had to fit with the bigger picture of how Mark Pope wanted to play as a head coach. And so, yes, Lamont Butler was the point guard that he didn't average 22 a game at San Diego State, but it didn't mean that he was pigeonholed or that he wasn't capable of being really good offensively. So if I'm a Kentucky fan, man, I am excited because this team, every time they take the floor, they look more confident. They look better. A new guy emerges. How about, Duke? Jackson Robinson doesn't play well, but Andrew Carr steps up. Tuesday night, it was Jackson Robinson and Lamont Butler. So many options, so many pieces. You got to be excited if you're a Kentucky fan. I am. So, yeah, I'm excited. All right, another show that I think we covered a lot of ground. We did a great thing. And I do think it's time for us to get out of here. If you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, do me a favor. Please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you get your podcasts, make sure that you are subscribed. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube. You want to do your boy Torres a quick favor? Subscribe on YouTube. Just subscribe. Just put on notifications. We go live 3, 4, 5 times a week. We do clips every single day. We cover college sports better than anybody. So make sure that you're subscribed. That's all for today's show. I will be back Thursday afternoon. We'll start to preview the weekend in college football, and we will preview what is going to be a fun weekend and week ahead in college basketball. We got Arizona hosting Duke on Friday night, and then the Maui Invitational starting Monday. Time for me to get out of here. Appreciate everybody's support. I will be back tomorrow with a new episode of the Aaron Torres Pod. Shout out to Tor and Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Redick. You F-head. Unblock me, bro. I'll be back tomorrow.